He thought he was walking into that hospital to find the truth about his staff. He did not realize the truth he would find was about himself. The emergency wing of Callaway Medical Center smelled the way it always did at 7 in the morning: antiseptic, burnt coffee, and something underneath that no amount of industrial cleaning could quite reach. Gareth Hollis knew that smell the way he knew the back of his own hand. He had built this place, after all. 14 years, 2 construction phases, 1 near bankruptcy, and a naming rights dispute that had gone to court. He knew every hallway, every supply closet, every drainage problem in the East Wing that facilities kept patching instead of fixing properly. But this morning he was not here as Gareth Hollis, CEO and majority owner of Hollis Health Group, one of the largest private hospital networks in Ontario. He was here as a man in a worn fleece jacket and scuffed boots, a day's worth of stubble on his jaw, a forged referral letter in his pocket, and a chest complaint vague enough to get him through triage without raising flags. He had done this before, twice, at the Vancouver location. Both times the results had been humiliating for his senior management team. He had found nurses falsifying rest break logs, an orderly who had been clocking double shifts under 2 names, a department head who spent most of Tuesday afternoons in the private lounge watching baseball. The investigations that followed were quiet, swift, and deeply unpleasant for everyone involved except Gareth, who had walked away from each one feeling righteous and cold and very much in control. He told himself this visit was no different. The triage desk was staffed by a woman he did not recognize, which was good. She had short auburn hair pulled back without ceremony and a name badge that read Rosalind Featherstone, RN. She glanced up from her screen when he approached, and her expression did not shift into the particular brand of professional warmth that hospitals trained their staff to perform for visitors in expensive coats. She just looked at him, plainly, like a person looking at another person. "Morning," she said. "What brings you in?" He gave her the prepared story. Chest tightness, intermittent, started a few days ago. He was vague about his doctor because he did not have one listed in the system. He had arranged that carefully. Rosalind Featherstone typed without hurrying him, and without the impatience he had half expected from a morning triage nurse 40 minutes into a 12-hour shift. When she asked follow-up questions, they were precise. Not scripted precise, the way staff answered when they knew they were being evaluated. Genuinely precise, the kind that come from actually listening. "Any travel recently?" she asked. "Montreal, couple weeks ago." "Okay," she made a note. "How's your sleep been?" He blinked. "Fine." "I'm going to flag this as moderate priority," she said, "which means you'll likely wait 40 minutes, maybe a bit more. There's a bay opening up around 8. Is that okay?" "That's fine," Gareth said. "There's coffee at the end of the hall." She paused. "I wouldn't recommend it, but it's there." He almost smiled. He sat in the plastic waiting room chair, and he watched. That was the real purpose of the morning. The chest complaint was cover. What he was actually doing was observing the rhythm of his emergency department, the thing that no operations report, no patient satisfaction survey, no quarterly performance review had ever managed to capture cleanly. What he saw in the first 20 minutes was not what he'd come to find. Down the hall, a man in hospital scrubs, name badge reading Trent, Facilities, was leaning against the wall outside a supply room, scrolling his phone, while an older patient in a wheelchair sat 6 feet away, visibly unable to reach the call button that had slid off the arm of her chair. The patient looked at the button. She looked at Trent. Trent did not look up. And then Rosalind Featherstone came around the corner. She wasn't on her way to the patient. She was clearly on her way somewhere else, carrying a manila folder and moving with the efficiency of someone who had 17 things to do and 14 minutes to do them. She saw the woman in the wheelchair. She stopped. She picked up the call button, pressed it into the woman's hand, asked something quietly. The woman answered. Rosalind said something back that made the woman's shoulders drop about 2 inches, the specific drop of someone who has been holding tension they did not realize they were carrying. Then Rosalind kept moving. The whole exchange took 45 seconds. Trent had not looked up from his phone. Gareth watched this and felt something he had not expected to feel this early in the morning, which was shame. Not the productive, actionable shame of identifying a problem and preparing to solve it, the older, quieter kind, the kind that makes you look at the floor for a moment. At 8:15, a different nurse came to collect him. He was brought to a bay, examined by a resident who was good but visibly exhausted, and told his heart sounded fine, but they'd run a panel to be certain. The wait for results would be a couple of hours. He was left alone with a curtain around him, and the sounds of the department shifting into its mid-morning rhythm. It was Rosalind Featherstone who came to check on him at 9:40. She was not his assigned nurse. He did not know why she was there until she explained, almost as an aside, that his assigned nurse had been pulled to a trauma intake and she was covering 2 bays temporarily. She asked how he was doing. She checked his chart, confirmed where his results were in the queue, and then, because he had a look on his face that apparently warranted it, she asked if he had someone who could come sit with him. "I'm fine," he said. "I don't need anyone." She looked at him the way she had looked at him at triage. Plainly, "That's not what I asked." He didn't have an answer for that. She pulled the chair to the side of the bay and sat down for a moment, not in the careful, performance-reviewed way that hospital staff sometimes sat down to demonstrate patient-centered care. She sat down because she was tired, and because he looked like a man who needed someone to sit near him for 2 minutes, and she had 2 minutes. "Results should be back by 11, she said. "The resident on your file is good. She's thorough." A pause. "Is this your first time having chest stuff checked out?" "First time in a hospital in about 8 years, he said, which was the truth, stripped of context. Rosalind nodded slowly. "That tracks. A lot of people wait too long." She stood, smoothed her scrubs. "I'll check back before your results come. If anything changes, use the call button. And I mean actually use it," she added, with a dry flatness that he suspected was her version of warmth, "not the thing where you decide you're bothering us." She left. He stared at the ceiling. He had come here to find evidence of what he'd been reading in the staff feedback surveys. Low morale in the ER, high turnover, a union grievance filed in February that his VP of Human Resources had summarized in 3 bullet points on a slide deck. He had assumed the problem was performance, the wrong people in the wrong roles, insufficient accountability structures. He had built his career on identifying those problems and fixing them efficiently. What he had not considered, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital bed in a hospital he owned, was that the problem might not be the staff at all. The results came back clean. His heart was fine. The resident delivered the news with quiet professionalism and a recommendation for a follow-up with a GP, which he accepted with a straight face. At 11:30, he was cleared to leave. He was pulling on his jacket when Rosalind Featherstone came back. "Good news, I'm guessing," she said, reading something in his face. "All clear." "Good." She handed him a printed discharge summary. "There's a list of walk-in clinics at the bottom that take new patients if you need a regular doctor. I circled the ones closest to, well, I don't know where you are, but the ones with the shortest wait times, generally." He looked at the paper. She had circled 4 clinics in different parts of the city and written, in small, neat handwriting, "Evenings, weekends okay," next to 2 of them. "You did this for every discharge?" he asked. "For the ones who said they don't have a GP," she said simply. He folded the paper. "Thank you, Rosalind." She shrugged one shoulder. "Feel better. Drive safe." He walked out through the emergency bay and into the gray November morning, and he stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital that had his name attached to it in 6-inch letters above the main entrance, and he stayed there for a long time. He had come to collect evidence. He had collected it. None of it was what he thought he was looking for. Gareth Hollis's house was in Rosedale, a 15-minute drive from the hospital on a quiet morning, and 35 on a bad one. It was a large house by any measure, made of old brick and newer glass, with a kitchen he had renovated twice because he kept changing his mind about the island. He lived there alone. His ex-wife, Patricia, had taken the Calgary house in the separation, which had suited them both in ways neither of them said out loud. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and the discharge summary Rosalind had handed him, and he pulled up the employee file the HR system allowed him to access. Rosalind Featherstone, RN, 34 years old, 7 years at Callaway Medical Center. Performance reviews, consistently exceeds expectations, with a note in the most recent cycle that she had flagged a documentation error that, had it not been caught, would have resulted in a medication interaction for a post-surgical patient. She had caught it on someone else's file on her own time, between shifts. She had filed one formal complaint in 7 years, against a department supervisor. Gareth read the summary twice. The complaint had been substantiated. The supervisor had been moved laterally. The lateral move had been accompanied by a salary increase. He pushed back from the table. He thought about the union grievance filed in February. He had received a summary. He had not read the original document. He had let his VP of Human Resources reduce it to 3 bullet points, and he had accepted that summary because he had been busy with an acquisition in Winnipeg and he had trusted the system to manage it. The system had moved a substantiated harasser into a slightly different seat with a raise attached. Gareth opened the original grievance document. It had been filed on behalf of 11 nursing staff in the emergency department. He read it from the beginning. It took 40 minutes. When he was done, he sat very still in the quiet of his kitchen and listened to the sound of November rain beginning against the windows. The problem was not the staff. He had known this, distantly, the way you know something you are not ready to look at directly. The surveys had told him. The turnover numbers had told him. The February grievance had been trying to tell him in language careful enough to survive a formal process, which meant it had been restrained, measured, and still somehow the clearest description of a system that was failing the people who kept it running. He thought about Rosalind checking on an old woman's dropped call button on her way somewhere else. Rosalind circling walk-in clinics by hand on discharge summaries for patients who admitted they didn't have a doctor. Rosalind filing a complaint about a supervisor and being rewarded with nothing except the knowledge that the supervisor got a raise. He thought about the way she had sat down beside him for 2 minutes, not because policy required it, but because she had decided it was the right thing to do. He pulled up a blank document and he started writing, not a directive, not a memo, a list of questions he did not currently know how to answer. What does it cost, structurally, to keep people like Rosalind Featherstone in a system that has given them every reason to leave? What does it cost when they do leave? What did the February grievance cost in terms of what did not happen? The patients who did not get the circled clinic lists, the call buttons that nobody picked up. He had spent 14 years measuring the wrong things. He closed the laptop at some point after midnight. The rain had stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the hospital 3 days later, a Tuesday evening in November, the sky the specific gray of Lake Ontario in autumn, the kind of cold that has weight to it. Gareth had spent the intervening days in his office, in conversations he should have been having for years, reading documents he should have read in February. He was standing on the sidewalk because he had no better plan. He saw Rosalind come through the employee exit at 7:15. She had a bag over one shoulder and her hair down now, moving quickly the way people move when they have somewhere to be. She did not see him until she was almost past him. She stopped, looked at him with careful, measured surprise. "You were a patient last week," she said. "I was." "You're not supposed to be here," she said, not unkindly. "This is the employee exit." "I know," he said. "I'm the one who had it put in." A pause. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "I don't understand what that means." He told her his name, his full name, the one attached to the building in 6-inch letters. He watched her face as it rearranged itself into something careful and closed, the expression of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them has shifted and is deciding how to stand. "Gareth Hollis," she repeated. "Yes. You came to the emergency department as a patient." "As a patient who was also watching," he said. "I do it at our other locations. It gives me information that operations reports don't." Rosalind looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the evening traffic moved past with no particular interest in either of them. "And what information did you get?" she asked. Her voice was level. "Enough to understand that I have been misreading my own organization for longer than I'm comfortable admitting." He paused. "I read the February grievance. The original document, not the summary I was given." Something crossed her face, not softening, the opposite, a sharpening. "And," she said, "and I owe the staff who filed it a response that isn't a lateral transfer and a pay raise for the person they complained about." Silence. A bus moved past. "Why are you telling me this?" Rosalind asked. "Because you were the one who handed me a discharge summary with clinics circled by hand," he said. and because I wanted you to know that I saw it." She adjusted the strap of her bag. Her face was still guarded, but something in it had shifted very slightly, in the way that very slightly is sometimes the only shift that matters. "I do that for everyone who doesn't have a GP," she said. "I know." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Could I buy you a coffee? There's a place on Bloor that's not terrible." She looked at him with the same plainness she had used on him in triage, the look that had nothing performed in it. "You own a hospital," she said. "I work in it." "You're off the clock," he said, "and I'm asking as a person, not as someone's employer." She considered this for long enough that he thought she was going to say no. He had prepared for no. No would have been reasonable. "One coffee," she said. "And I'm telling you right now, I have opinions about the February situation." "I'm counting on it," he said. The coffee shop on Bloor was the kind that had been there long enough to be unremarkable, which was why it was good. They sat at a table near the window, and Rosalind talked, and Gareth listened in the way he was slowly relearning how to listen, without the part of his brain that was already formulating responses and solutions and quarterly timelines. She talked about what the February grievance had actually described, not the formal language of it, but what it had felt like on the floor, the particular erosion that happens when the person making your shifts difficult is also the person evaluating your performance. She talked about a colleague who had left last spring, a nurse with 11 years of experience, who had moved to a community clinic for 40 minutes outside the city. Because the commute was worth it to work somewhere, she felt like a person. She talked about the documentation error she had caught. She said this quietly, almost as an aside, and he realized she had never mentioned it to anyone as an accomplishment. She had mentioned it in the context of describing why clear handoff protocols mattered. He ordered them both a second coffee when the first ones ran out. She let him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Why does a CEO who owns 14 hospitals need to come in disguise to find out what's happening in them?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I told myself the reports were enough." "Were they?" "No." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "The people who write reports are also trying to manage what you think about them." "I know that now." "You probably knew it before," she said, not unkindly, but without softening it. He looked at his coffee. "Yes," he said, "I probably did." They left the coffee shop at 9:15. On the sidewalk, with the cold coming back properly now, she stopped and turned to him. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "Go ahead." "I'm going to go back to work on Thursday, and I'm going to do my job the same way I always have. Whatever you're planning to do with what you found, that's separate from me. I don't want to be part of a story about what the CEO discovered and fixed. I just want the thing that was wrong in February to actually get fixed." "That's fair," he said. "And I want the person who got a raise," she added, "to not be supervising anyone anymore." "I can tell you that's already in motion," he said. She looked at him with something that was not quite trust and not quite its absence, a held space, the beginning of a question. "Okay," she said. She zipped her jacket. "Good night, Gareth." "Good night, Rosalind." She walked toward the subway entrance. He watched her go with the sensation of someone who has just handed something over that they did not know they were carrying. The changes to the emergency department were not announced with a press release. Gareth had learned enough to know that announcements about change are often the thing organizations do instead of change. He worked with HR over several weeks, in meetings that were longer and more uncomfortable than any acquisition negotiation he had been through, to address the February grievance properly. The supervisor in question was separated from the organization. The settlement was quiet. The conditions were not. He restructured the reporting line for department heads so that frontline staff had a direct channel that did not route through the same managers being reviewed. He contracted an external group to conduct listening sessions in every department, without advance notice to management, without his name attached to the process. He read every summary himself. He also, without announcing this to anyone, changed the way he handled his own calendar. He blocked Thursday mornings, not for meetings, for walking through whichever facility he was visiting that week without an escort, without a schedule, stopping when something warranted stopping. His executive assistant, a man named Brooks who had worked for him for 6 years and knew better than to ask, simply marked the blocks as internal and moved other things around them. He sent Rosalind Featherstone a message through the hospital's internal system 4 weeks after the coffee on Bloor. He had thought carefully about what to say. He wrote, "The structural changes in your department are moving forward. If there are things you're seeing that aren't being captured, I'd like to know. This is not a performance review. It is not a test. It's a request." She replied 11 hours later, at what he calculated was shortly before the end of a night shift. "There are a few things. I'll write them down properly." She did, 3 pages, single-spaced, practical and specific, and written in the tone of someone who had thought about these things for a long time, and was choosing, carefully, to believe they might be heard. He read it at his kitchen table on a Sunday morning, with coffee that was better than the hospital kind, and he felt something that he recognized, distantly, as the specific weight of being trusted by someone who had no particular reason to trust him. They met again in March, at the same coffee shop, and again in April, at a different one, she suggested. By May, he had stopped framing their conversations as work-adjacent and had started admitting to himself, in the privacy of his own kitchen, that he looked forward to them in a way that had nothing to do with operational improvement. He did not act on this quickly. He was aware, with uncomfortable clarity, of the structure of what existed between them. He owned the hospital. She worked in it. The power imbalance was not subtle, and he was not willing to pretend it was. He told her this directly, in June, at the end of a dinner that had not been framed as dinner in the way things that are clearly dinners sometimes are not framed as dinners. He said, "I want to be honest with you about something, and I need you to know this is not a condition of anything. It is just true." She looked at him across the table. "I've been thinking about you as more than someone I'm trying to do right by," he said. "I'm aware of what that means given the context, and I'm not going to do anything with it unless you tell me that's something you want, and even then I think we'd both need to think carefully about what that looks like." Rosalind was quiet for long enough that he started composing his graceful exit from the conversation. Then she said, "I've been thinking about it too." She said, "I needed to know that the February situation was going to be handled, regardless of whether I was someone you were interested in. That was the thing I had to be sure of first." He said, "I understand that." She said, "I think I'm sure of it now." Outside, in the long light of a June evening in Toronto, they walked without particular destination, the way you walk when the walk is the point. She told him about her family in Cape Breton, a mother who was still sharp at 72 and had opinions about everything, 2 brothers who were both funnier than her and knew it. He told her about Patricia, about the Calgary house, about the particular kind of quiet that comes with building something large and finding yourself alone inside it. She did not fill the quiet with reassurance. She just let it be a true thing he had said and walked beside him. This, he was beginning to understand, was what she did. She let things be what they were. She did not perform around the difficult parts. She arrived at them plainly, with her hands not quite in her pockets and her eyes not quite looking away. He thought about Trent in the hallway, scrolling his phone while the woman in the wheelchair couldn't reach her call button. He thought about Rosalind stopping in the middle of something else for 45 seconds because there was a person in front of her who needed something she could give. He had spent 14 years believing that the measure of a system was its efficiency. He was beginning to understand that the measure of a system was its Rosalines, how many it produced, how many it kept, how many it drove away to community clinics 40 minutes outside the city because the commute was worth feeling like a person. He had built something large. He was not sure until recently that he had built something good. That was the thing worth fixing, he was slowly learning. Not with directives, not with reorganized reporting structures, though those mattered too, but with the older, harder work of paying attention to what was actually in front of him, stopping when something warranted stopping. Reading the full document, not the summary. Asking, not testing. In September, the union filed no grievances. In November, the department's retention numbers shifted in a direction they had not shifted in 3 years. Brooks, who tracked these things, mentioned it with careful neutrality on a Wednesday morning. Gareth said thank you and moved on to the next item. On a Friday in late October, He met Rosalind outside the hospital after her shift. They were going to a gallery opening that she had mentioned 2 weeks ago, and that he had remembered, and that she had pretended to be surprised he remembered, though she had not been surprised. The evening was cold and clear, the kind of Toronto autumn that justifies every winter that comes after it. She came through the employee exit with her bag over her shoulder and her hair loose, moving the way she always moved, which was purposefully, and she saw him on the sidewalk, and her face did the thing it had started doing in the last several months, which was not a large thing but which he had come to think of as the clearest and most valuable data point his particular life had ever produced. He was not, he understood now, a man who tested people to find out if they were real. He was a man who had been too afraid to simply ask. The difference was not complicated, it was just hard. He had been learning, in the manner of someone who has come to it later than is comfortable to admit, that the only relationships worth building are the ones where both people are standing on the same ground, looking at the same thing, with nothing hidden between them. He was not sure he had earned this yet. He thought he was beginning to. I keep thinking about the 45 seconds. That's how long it took Rosalind Featherstone to stop, pick up a dropped call button, and say something quiet to an old woman in a wheelchair. 45 seconds. Trent was standing 6 feet away, scrolling his phone. Rosalind wasn't even supposed to be in that hallway. She was on her way somewhere else. And she still stopped. That's the thing I missed for years. Not the dramatic failures, not the fraud or the falsified logs that I'd found in other locations. The quiet version. The place where a system tells the people keeping it alive that stopping for 45 seconds is not their job. Not today, not on this shift, not while someone else is standing there doing nothing. And eventually, they believe it. Or they leave for a clinic 40 minutes outside the city because the commute is worth feeling like a person again. I built 14 hospitals. I measured bed turnover and wait times and satisfaction scores. I got very good at reading summaries, and somewhere in all of that, I stopped reading the actual documents. I let a substantiated complaint get reduced to 3 bullet points on a slide, and I moved on to an acquisition in Winnipeg, and a person who had harassed 11 nurses ended up with a raise and a lateral move. That's not a system failure. That's a choice I made, dressed up as efficiency. What Rosalind showed me, not because she was trying to, just because it's how she moves through the world, is what integrity actually looks like when nobody's watching. She didn't know she was being observed in that hallway. She didn't know the man at triage was the name on the building. She circled clinics on discharge summaries at the end of 12-hour shifts because that's what she decided mattered. That kind of consistency, the kind that doesn't change when the stakes change or the audience changes, is the thing I'd been trying to measure without knowing how to name it. And Rosalind had another quality I'd undervalued in the people around me for most of my career, which is that she thought clearly even when she was tired. She filed a complaint when most people would have decided it wasn't worth it. She wrote 3 single-spaced pages about structural problems in a department she had every reason to be cynical about, and she wrote them with precision and without bitterness. That kind of clear-eyed thinking, the kind that keeps caring about whether something is true even after the system has given you reasons not to, is rarer than anything on a performance review. The third thing is harder to name. She rebuilt herself, quietly, without asking anyone's permission. She watched a supervisor get rewarded for behavior that had worn her colleagues down, and she kept showing up. She caught a medication error on her own time, on someone else's file, and she mentioned it almost as a footnote while describing why handoff protocols needed to change. That's not performance. That's the kind of endurance that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only see if you're paying attention in the right direction. I wasn't for a long time. I was paying attention to the wrong things, in the wrong direction, and calling it leadership. I'm trying to learn the difference. It's slower than I expected. Most things worth understanding are,